There is a moment in ancient lore where hell did not roar. It did not scream, it did not rage, and it did not erupt in fire or rebellion. Instead, it went silent. Not the silence of defeat, and not the silence of fear, but a silence so profound that it unsettled even the oldest beings who dwelled there. For the first time since the underworld came into existence, nothing moved. No chains rattled. No screams echoed through the corridors of flame. No laughter crawled along the walls of shadow. The sound that defined hell simply ceased to exist, as though the realm itself had paused to listen. Hell had always been loud. From its earliest moments, it was shaped by noise, by suffering, by command, by defiance, by endless despair. Sound was not merely a byproduct of torment, it was part of the structure itself. Every cry reinforced the order of the realm. Every echo reminded the imprisoned that eternity was unchanging. That is why the silence mattered. It spread slowly, like a shadow creeping across the underworld, reaching places untouched by time. Ancient demons froze mid-motion, uncertain of what had occurred. Spirits long accustomed to endless anguish lifted their awareness towards something unfamiliar. The underworld, for the first time, was holding its breath. Hell has gates. This truth is older than fear itself. Every realm, whether of light or darkness, exists with boundaries, and boundaries demand guardians. Gates are not merely entrances or exits, they are declarations of authority. They exist to draw a line between what is permitted and what is forbidden. Hell's gates were absolute, not built of iron or stone, but forged from law itself. They stood as thresholds between captivity and freedom, between judgment and release. Nothing crossed them by accident, and nothing passed through them by force. No demon, no soul, no power had ever opened them willingly. At the greatest of these thresholds stood a being older than the first crown ever worn by man, older than the rise of nations, older than memory itself. He was neither hero nor villain, neither cruel nor merciful. He did not rule hell, and he did not command its armies. He was simply known as the gatekeeper. For ages beyond counting, he had been the final authority between the imprisoned and the impossible. Every soul that begged at the gates felt his presence. Every demon respected his position. Every law of the underworld bent around his role. And yet, despite everything he had witnessed, he had never once been moved. He had seen mortals cling to hope until hope abandoned them. He had seen prophets whisper truths that died unheard. He had watched kings, stripped of power, kneel in desperation at the very threshold he guarded. He had heard promises made in agony and curses spoken in regret. And every time, the gate remained closed. Not because he was cruel, but because he did not choose. He could not choose. The gatekeeper was bound by a command older than hell itself, a law written not in words, but into existence. He was created to stand, to observe, and to open the gate only when authority itself arrived. For centuries that turned into millennia, and millennia that faded into eternity, he stood unmoved. Civilizations rose above the earth and crumbled back into dust. Generations passed like fleeting shadows across the living world. Belief itself evolved, fractured, and reformed. Still, the gates never yielded. Nothing had ever arrived that qualified. Until something did. There was no sound at first, no movement to announce it. Instead, there was a shift, subtle, almost imperceptible. The fabric of the underworld itself changed, like distant pressure before a storm breaks, except this storm carried no thunder. The gatekeeper felt it before he understood it. A presence had entered the realm, not approaching the gate, not forcing entry, but existing where it had never existed before. In that moment, the silence finally made sense. Demons did not stop speaking because they were afraid. They stopped because something greater had taken precedence. The screams of the damned did not fade because suffering had ended, they faded because suffering was no longer the loudest truth in the realm. For the first time since Hell's creation, its laws were no longer the highest authority present. And the gatekeeper, ancient and unshaken for eternity, felt something he had never felt before, not power, not threat, but inevitability. The gate did not shake. It did not resist. It waited. And so did the gatekeeper. For the first time in all of existence, the one who had never questioned his duty stood before the threshold and understood that the moment his purpose had been written for was finally at hand. This was not a battle, not a rebellion, not a siege from heaven. It was a surrender, and it would change everything. As the silence stretched across the underworld, a single question echoed through every shadow, every demon, and every imprisoned soul: who was approaching the gate, and why did hell itself make way? The underworld was never the chaos mortals imagined it to be. That misconception came from fear, not understanding. To the living, hell was flame and disorder, a place where cruelty ruled unchecked. But beneath the fire and shadow was something far more unsettling: structure. Hell was a system, carefully arranged, meticulously enforced, and governed by laws that had never been broken. Chaos may have existed within its walls, but the realm itself was built on order. Every soul had a designation. Every punishment had a purpose. Every shadowed corridor served a function. Demons were not wandering beasts acting on impulse, they were administrators of consequence, bound to roles they did not question. Some oversaw suffering, others enforced confinement, and others ensured that nothing, absolutely nothing, escaped its assigned fate. The underworld functioned not on rage alone, but on discipline. And discipline demanded boundaries. Those boundaries were the gates. They were not physical doors in the way mortals understood such things. No hinges, no locks forged by hand. The gates were thresholds of authority, woven into the fabric of existence itself. They marked the division between states of being, life and death, judgment and release, captivity and freedom. To cross them was not merely to move from one place to another, but to pass from one authority to a higher one. That was why they could not be forced. Strength meant nothing before them. Power, ambition, rebellion, none of it mattered. Only authority could grant passage. This was why the gates inspired fear even among demons. Not fear of punishment, but fear of limitation. They represented a boundary even hell could not overstep. Many had tried. Over the ages, powerful entities had tested the gates, probing them for weakness, seeking to bend the laws that governed them. Each attempt ended the same way: failure. The gates did not respond to desire or violence. They responded only to permission. And permission was not given lightly. Standing watch over these thresholds was the gatekeeper, a role as old as the system itself. He was not stationed there as a guard in the mortal sense, but as an embodiment of law. His presence was the final acknowledgement that judgment had been rendered and could not be undone. Souls brought before the gates understood this instinctively. Some screamed. Some pleaded. Some raged. Others fell into despairing silence. None of it mattered. The gatekeeper did not weigh emotion. He did not reconsider fate. He merely bore witness to it. For eons, the pattern never changed. Souls arrived, judgment was enforced, and the gates remained closed. The underworld continued its endless cycle, unchallenged and absolute. Demons grew comfortable in this certainty. They mocked the idea of escape. Hope was treated as a cruelty, a lie whispered only to deepen suffering. The gates, they believed, would never open. But certainty has a weakness. It assumes the future will resemble the past. What none of them understood was that the gates were not designed to remain closed forever. Their purpose was not eternal confinement, but obedience. They were bound to authority, and authority existed beyond the underworld. The law that governed hell was not self-created. It was inherited. And that inheritance carried a condition: when true authority arrived, the system would be required to yield. The demons did not know this. Most of them never questioned the origin of the laws they enforced. They followed hierarchy, not philosophy. The gatekeeper, however, knew. He had always known. His role was not simply to guard the gates, but to recognize the moment when guarding them was no longer required. That was the burden of his existence. He was created not just to deny passage, but to one day allow it. That day had never come. Until now. As the silence spread across the underworld, subtle changes began to ripple through the system. Demons who had never hesitated felt uncertainty creep into their awareness. Commands issued from higher ranks went unanswered, not out of defiance, but distraction. Something had disrupted the order, and no one understood how or why. The gates themselves seemed different, not weakened, not damaged, but attentive. As though they were listening. The gatekeeper felt this shift more clearly than anyone else. The laws he embodied were still intact, yet something within them had activated, like a long-dormant clause finally coming into effect. He sensed that the authority he had been bound to recognize was near. Not approaching in the way armies approached, but present in a way that defied distance altogether. This presence did not challenge the system. It did not attempt to override it. Instead, it fulfilled it. And that realization unsettled even the gatekeeper. For the first time in eternity, the underworld was not merely enforcing judgment. It was preparing to acknowledge something greater than itself. The gates, which had always existed to deny, were on the verge of remembering why they had been created in the first place. Whatever was coming was not here to destroy hell. It was here to redefine it. And as the silence held, unbroken and absolute, the system that had ruled the underworld for ages began to confront a truth it had never faced before: authority does not originate in darkness, and law does not belong to those who enforce it. Somewhere beyond the gates, the source of that authority had arrived, and nothing in the underworld, not its order, not its hierarchy, not even its most ancient laws, would be able to pretend otherwise. The being known as Abyrion had never been meant to be understood. Even among demons, his existence was spoken of with restraint, not out of reverence, but caution. He was not like the others. He did not rise through hierarchy, nor did he claim power through conquest or cunning. Abyrion had not been forged by ambition. He had been appointed by necessity. Long before the underworld had names, before punishment had shape or order, there was a problem that existence itself could not ignore. Death had entered creation, but authority over it had not yet been defined. Souls crossed thresholds without witness. Judgment lacked boundary. Eternity, for a time, was unguarded. That imbalance could not be allowed to persist. So Abyrion was formed. Not born, not created in the mortal sense, but established. His essence was bound to law the way fire is bound to heat. He did not question because questioning was never part of his design. Where others possessed will, Abyrion possessed function. Where others ruled through desire or cruelty, he ruled through inevitability. He was not given the keys because he sought them, but because he could never misuse them. From the moment he stood at the gate, Abyrion understood his curse. He would see everything and change nothing. He would know every outcome and prevent none. Souls would plead with him using names, memories, regrets, and promises. Demons would test him with mockery and threats. Kings would arrive still believing their authority followed them beyond death. None of it mattered. Abyrion did not weigh stories. He did not compare suffering. He did not calculate worth. His role was not justice. It was enforcement. Time did not pass for Abyrion as it did for others. Ages blended together into a single, continuous awareness. He remembered the first soul that ever stood before the gate, confused and terrified, still clinging to the illusion that death could be undone. He remembered the first demon who laughed at that soul, confident in the permanence of the system. He remembered when belief systems rose and collapsed, when entire civilizations arrived carrying the same assumptions, the same hopes, the same disbelief. Every era brought new expectations. Some believed knowledge would save them. Others believed devotion would open the gate. Some arrived convinced that power, accumulated during life, would command respect in death. Abyrion watched them all fail. Not because the gate was cruel, but because it was honest. The gate did not respond to what souls believed they deserved. It responded only to what authority permitted. That was why Abyrion feared one thing and one thing alone. Not rebellion. Not destruction. Not even the end of the underworld itself. He feared recognition. He feared the moment when the authority he had been bound to acknowledge would finally stand before him. Because when that happened, his role would end. And for a being defined entirely by purpose, the end of purpose was the closest thing to fear he could experience. As the silence continued to grip the underworld, Abyrion became aware that this moment was approaching. The law within him stirred, not in alarm, but in preparation. Something ancient and absolute was aligning. The command that had defined his existence was no longer dormant. It was activating. For the first time, Abyrion did not merely stand at the gate. He considered it. Not with doubt, but with understanding. He realized then that he had never truly guarded the gate against escape. He had guarded it for this moment. The gate was not designed to imprison forever. It was designed to wait. And Abyrion was not a jailer. He was a witness to authority. Around him, the underworld continued to struggle with the change it could not comprehend. Demons whispered among themselves, uneasy and confused. The hierarchy faltered as commands lost urgency. The dead felt something shift in the weight of eternity, as though the future had quietly rewritten itself. Yet none of them understood what Abyrion did. The one who was coming did not threaten the law. He fulfilled it. And that realization carried a weight heavier than any burden Abyrion had borne before. Because it meant that everything he had enforced for eons had been leading to a single moment of surrender. Not surrender in defeat, but surrender in obedience. The highest act of loyalty he could offer was not resistance, but recognition. The keys at his side, once inert and unquestioned, now felt different. They were no longer symbols of control. They were reminders of trust, trust placed in him by a law that knew it would one day be superseded. Abyrion understood then that his obedience had never been about denying passage. It had been about waiting for the one who had the right to pass. As the presence drew nearer, though it did not move in any measurable way, Abyrion felt certainty settle into place. The gate did not belong to him. It never had. It belonged to the authority that established it, and that authority was now present within the underworld itself. Abyrion turned fully toward the threshold. He did not raise the keys. He did not speak. He waited. Because when authority stands before law, law does not argue. It listens. The arrival did not announce itself. There was no tearing of the sky, no eruption of light, no sound to mark the crossing. In fact, if one were listening only for noise, they would have missed it entirely. What entered the underworld did so without disturbance, without resistance, as though the realm itself had already made room. Authority does not need permission. It simply arrives. The underworld reacted before it understood. Long corridors that had echoed endlessly with suffering fell quiet. Flames that had burned without purpose seemed to dim, not extinguished, but subdued. Demons who had never hesitated, never questioned, suddenly found themselves unable to move, as though instinct itself had been interrupted. They did not feel fear in the way mortals do. What they felt was something far more unsettling: awareness. This presence did not radiate violence. It did not exert pressure or command submission. Instead, it carried certainty. A certainty so complete that resistance felt irrelevant. The underworld had been shaped by dominance and enforcement, but this was neither. This presence did not conquer space. It belonged to it. Among the dead, something unfamiliar stirred. Souls long resigned to eternity felt a change they could not name. It was not freedom, not yet, but the memory of it. A distant recognition of something lost, something once promised. Hope, long treated as a lie, flickered faintly, not as emotion, but as truth remembered rather than imagined. Demons whispered among themselves, though even whispers felt inappropriate. Ancient enforcers of torment, beings who had delighted in certainty, now found that certainty dissolving. Commands issued from higher ranks lost meaning as hierarchy faltered. No order had been given to stop. No authority had been challenged. Yet the system itself was responding as though something fundamental had shifted. Because it had. This was not a foreign power invading the underworld. It was the source of authority entering a realm that had borrowed its rules. The underworld was not being threatened with destruction. It was being confronted with origin. And origin does not argue with its creation. Abyrion felt the descent more clearly than any other being. Where others sensed disruption, he sensed alignment. The command bound to his existence stirred fully now, no longer dormant, no longer waiting. Every law he had enforced, every refusal he had carried out, every moment of unyielding obedience suddenly made sense. This was the moment those laws had been written for. He did not see the arrival at first. Seeing was unnecessary. Presence preceded form. Authority does not need to be recognized to exist. Yet as the silence deepened, recognition followed inevitably. Abyrion understood then who had entered the underworld. Not through announcement, not through declaration, but through truth. Jesus. Not as a figure of suffering. Not as a symbol of sacrifice. But as the Lord of all creation. The one through whom life began. The one to whom death answered. The one whose authority predated the laws of hell itself. This presence did not demand entry. It did not call out to the gate. It did not summon the gatekeeper. It simply stood within the realm, and the realm responded. The underworld had never experienced this kind of authority because it had never been meant to contain it. Its systems existed beneath it, not alongside it. Abyrion turned fully toward the gate. The keys, bound to him for eons, felt heavier than they ever had before. Not because of resistance, but because of finality. He knew now that his role was ending. Not in failure, but in fulfillment. His obedience had not been wasted. It had been precise. He remembered the ancient command that defined his existence. Open only when authority itself arrives. For the first time, the condition had been met. Around him, the gates themselves responded. Not opening yet, not moving, but acknowledging. The law embedded within them recognized the presence they had been designed to obey. They did not tremble in fear. They resonated, as though remembering something forgotten. The gates were not barriers against this authority. They were pathways awaiting it. The underworld held its silence. Even torment seemed to pause, as though unwilling to intrude upon a moment that existed beyond suffering. Demons watched, uncertain whether to kneel or flee, unsure which instinct applied. The dead waited, suspended between despair and expectation, sensing that eternity had shifted but not yet understanding how. Abyrion stood alone at the threshold, older than kings, older than judgment, older than hell's certainty itself. For the first time since his establishment, he was not enforcing the law. He was witnessing its completion. This was not a descent of violence. It was a descent of authority. And authority does not rush. It allows the truth of its presence to unfold, undeniable and complete. The gate remained closed, but no longer sealed. The moment had arrived. The question was no longer whether it would open, but how. And for the first time since time began, hell was not waiting for resistance. It was waiting for release. Abyrion stepped closer to the gate, each movement deliberate, measured, as if time itself slowed around him. The keys he had carried for countless eons, keys that had never trembled, never faltered, shifted in his hand, vibrating faintly as though they recognized what was about to happen. The locks that had held the dead and the damned for eternity quivered, responding not to strength, but to presence. No chains shattered. No iron yielded. The gate did not resist. It simply acknowledged. For the first time in the history of the underworld, a threshold that had never opened voluntarily began to move. It did not groan or protest. It did not bend from pressure. It slid open slowly, reverently, as though honoring the authority before it. Abyrion did not force it. He did not command it. He simply allowed what had always been intended to occur. The underworld watched. Demons froze in place, caught between disbelief and awe. Whispers ceased entirely. Even those who had mocked and tormented for millennia realized in that instant that the rules they had relied upon no longer applied. The gates, the very laws they embodied, had recognized something higher. Something unstoppable. Something inevitable. Abyrion's eyes, deep and endless, fell upon the presence standing beyond the threshold. Not a mortal king. Not a warrior with armies behind him. Not a conqueror wielding fire or sword. But the one who bore the authority of life and death itself. Jesus. The Lord of all creation, whose very being had existed before the gates, before Abyrion, before hell itself. The arrival was quiet, unassuming, yet absolute. It carried no threat, demanded no respect, and yet inspired both. Abyrion's voice, usually as cold and unyielding as stone, broke the silence of the underworld. I have held these keys since the first soul fell, he said, his tone carrying the weight of countless centuries. I have seen empires crumble, prophets cry, kings kneel. I have judged nothing, denied nothing, intervened in nothing. For all eternity, I have obeyed only the law. But now I see that authority is not conquest. It is origin. It is the source from which all life, death, and eternity flows. And so, I yield. The gate, massive and ancient, shifted further, almost imperceptibly, until it finally began to part. The locks fell open as though releasing a long-held secret. The keys were no longer his to command. His duty, which had defined him for time beyond reckoning, had ended in a single act of acknowledgement. He did not tremble. He did not rejoice. He understood, and understanding was enough. This was not fear, nor hesitation. It was recognition. The underworld itself understood, though it could not speak. The path beyond the gate stretched infinitely, yet it did not terrify. Instead, it radiated certainty. Every shadow, every corner, every chamber of the underworld acknowledged what was happening. The system of law and punishment, of order and authority, was not broken. It had been fulfilled. The gates had opened because they were commanded by the one whose authority could not be denied. And for a moment, eternity itself seemed to exhale. Flames that had burned without purpose shifted their light. Shadows recoiled not in fear, but in reverence. The very air trembled, as if every atom of the underworld had recognized the presence of ultimate authority. Even the dead and the damned, those long accustomed to confinement and despair, sensed it. Hope, a concept long considered a lie within these halls, flickered like a long-forgotten memory. Abyrion did not move aside immediately. He watched. His duty, even in release, was to bear witness. And in witnessing, he saw what he had been waiting for since the creation of hell itself. Jesus, the Lord of all, stood ready to pass through the gate. There was no demand, no pleading, no command issued. The gate opened because it had always been intended to do so. It yielded to the one it was always meant to obey. The underworld had not lost a battle. It had not been conquered by force. It had surrendered not to power, but to law and authority older than itself. Abyrion finally stepped aside, slow and deliberate, honoring the countless ages he had spent guarding what was never truly his. And as the path opened fully, the realization settled over the realm like a wave. Hell had never understood the meaning of surrender. It had never faced obedience without coercion. And now, for the first time, it did. The air shifted. The demons, frozen in disbelief, could only watch. Abyrion spoke again, this time quieter, almost to himself, though every being present heard it. For centuries, I have watched, I have obeyed, I have endured. And now, I understand that even law itself must bow to the one who gave it existence. Jesus, the Lord of all, the origin of authority, has come, and I yield. The gates stood open, immense and unbroken, a threshold not of imprisonment but of transition. And the underworld, for the first time, acknowledged that its laws were subordinate to a higher power. The moment stretched, eternal in its significance, and every creature present understood the change. Something fundamental had shifted. Nothing would ever be the same. And in that silence, a truth was clear: hell had not been defeated in battle. It had lost something far more profound. It had lost the right to hold what was never theirs. The keys no longer belonged to Abyrion. The gates no longer demanded resistance. And the underworld, which had ruled for eons on fear and control, was now reminded that ultimate authority lies beyond its reach. Abyrion remained at the threshold, still and monumental, yet fundamentally changed. He was no longer merely a witness, he was a participant in the fulfillment of what he had guarded for all eternity. The keys that had symbolized command now rested loosely in his hand, inert, powerless, yet heavy with meaning. His gaze lingered on the figure beyond the gate, and for the first time, he saw authority not as challenge, not as threat, but as inevitability incarnate. He spoke, and his voice carried through the underworld, deep, measured, resonant like stone worn smooth by time itself. It was a voice that had never judged, never denied, never interfered, and yet now it carried acknowledgement. I have guarded these gates since the first soul fell. I have seen empires crumble, prophets weep, kings kneel. I have witnessed the dead and the damned plead in vain. I have obeyed law above all, and I have questioned nothing, denied nothing, intervened in nothing. Yet now I understand. Authority is not conquest. It is origin. It is the command from which all creation flows. And therefore, I yield. There was no tremor, no fear, no hesitation. His words did not announce defeat. They announced comprehension. They resonated through the halls of shadow and flame, into every corner where suffering and despair had once been absolute. Demons who had mocked the imprisoned for centuries faltered, unable to comprehend what they were hearing. Their disbelief was not scorn, it was a realization that their entire existence, built on assumption, had been overturned without violence. Abyrion stepped aside, but he did not rush. Every motion was deliberate, reverent, and weighty with centuries of obedience. His eyes, which had seen the rise and fall of empires and the fleeting arrogance of mortals, now rested on the one who had claimed authority without demanding it. Jesus did not speak. He did not gesture. He simply existed, and existence alone was sufficient to command recognition from the most unyielding laws of the underworld. The air itself seemed to acknowledge this truth. Shadows shifted subtly, not in fear, but in deferential recognition. The locks of the gate, mechanisms untouched by mortal or demon hand for millennia, clicked open softly as though in agreement. There was no struggle, no violence, no shattering of chains. The gates yielded because they were meant to. The path opened because obedience had been fulfilled, not coerced. Abyrion spoke again, quieter this time, his voice carrying the weight of reflection. I have watched. I have listened. I have endured. I have obeyed without question. I have not acted, for acting was not my purpose. And now, I see that even law itself is subordinate to what is eternal. Authority does not demand. It simply is. And all things must bend to it in recognition, whether they wish to or not. The underworld did not erupt in noise. It did not resist. It simply adjusted, like a body realigning to a force it had no choice but to accept. Even the dead, who had long since given up hope, felt the shift. Something within eternity itself had redefined the rules, and every soul, every shadow, every chained wretch sensed that they were no longer bound in the same way. What had been absolute was now subordinate to a higher command. Abyrion's words continued, echoing into the void, slow and deliberate, each phrase heavy with meaning. I do not yield to fear. I do not yield to desire. I do not yield to power. I yield to understanding. I yield to what has always been rightful, to what law itself cannot deny. Jesus, the Lord of all, stands before these gates, and I recognize his authority. The path is open. The law has been honored. The duty I carried for all eternity has ended in comprehension, not in conflict. He paused, allowing the weight of his statement to settle across the realm. Even the demons who had once ruled the corridors with cruelty sensed it. This was not weakness, this was not submission in terror. It was acknowledgement of truth. The underworld had not been defeated by force, but by authority that it could not resist. Every law, every rule, every threshold that Abyrion had enforced had been fulfilled, and in its fulfillment, it had changed forever. Finally, Abyrion stepped completely aside. He did not flee. He did not collapse. He did not tremble. He simply remained, monumental, eternal, yet fundamentally altered. The gate, once an instrument of absolute confinement, now stood as a testament not to power, but to obedience. The keys were no longer his. The authority that had created the law, that had defined the gates, had arrived, and the path was open. And in that silence, more profound than any scream hell had ever known, one truth echoed across eternity: some forces cannot be resisted. Some presence cannot be challenged. Some authority does not negotiate, does not bargain, and does not demand. It simply exists. It simply commands recognition. And even the oldest, most absolute laws must bow. Abyrion remained at the threshold, still guarding, still observing, yet transformed. The underworld had changed, not through conflict, but through the surrender of obedience to the one it had always been meant to recognize. And as the shadows settled, as the flames dimmed, and as the silence stretched across eternity, the realization lingered: there are moments in time when even the eternal must acknowledge what is greater. This was that moment. The underworld settled into a silence heavier than any before it, a quiet that carried the weight of realization. For eons, Abyrion had stood at the gate as an immutable figure, an authority that none could sway. He had been the measure against which every soul, every demon, every whisper of eternity had been judged. And yet, now, he was still present, still monumental, yet fundamentally changed. The keys he had borne for countless ages lay idle, their purpose fulfilled. His duty, eternal and absolute, had shifted in a single moment of acknowledgement. Around him, the underworld pulsed with a new awareness. Demons, who had once prided themselves on their cunning and control, now hesitated in corridors of shadow and fire. They no longer understood the scope of their authority, nor the boundaries of their influence. Something had entered the realm without resistance, without challenge, and the very laws that had governed existence had bent to recognize it. And in that recognition, even the most ancient enforcers felt a tremor of unease. The rules they had enforced for centuries no longer carried the same certainty. The gate itself remained, imposing and unbroken, but its meaning had transformed. It was no longer a tool of imprisonment or absolute control. It was a threshold not of denial, but of acknowledgement, a monument to obedience fulfilled and authority recognized. Abyrion stood beside it, neither triumphant nor defeated, simply present. The weight of eternity still pressed upon him, but no longer as an unyielding burden. It pressed as a reminder that even he, the oldest witness, had been required to yield to a higher truth. Abyrion's eyes scanned the underworld, taking in the quiet of the realms he had observed for ages. The tormented, the chained, the lost, all remained, yet a subtle change had passed through them. The air itself seemed to carry the whisper of hope, a faint recognition that their world, so rigid and unrelenting for millennia, had been touched by something beyond comprehension. It was not freedom, not yet, but the knowledge that even eternity could acknowledge authority higher than itself. He spoke once more, his voice steady, deliberate, and imbued with the gravity of centuries. "I remain," he said, "but I am no longer absolute. I guard the gate, yet I do so knowing that the power it represents belongs elsewhere. I do not command. I do not judge. I observe. And I remember that some authority is eternal, some presence unassailable, and some gates are not opened by force, but by the one they were always meant to obey." And in that moment, Abyrion understood fully what it meant to serve eternity without question, to witness the moment when all purpose finds its fulfillment, to step aside while creation itself recognizes its origin, to exist as both guardian and observer, eternal yet transformed. The underworld had not lost a war, it had lost the pretense of dominion. Its systems, its rules, its enforcers, all now bowed, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement of something far greater than they had ever known. The shadows shifted, not in fear, but in understanding. The flames burned with less malice, the corridors of torment seemed quieter, and the very air carried the subtle hum of a universe acknowledging order beyond its own. And through it all, Abyrion stood at the gate, monumental, eternal, transformed, a sentinel whose role had not ended but had evolved into something far deeper than enforcement. He had witnessed surrender, not in defeat, but in comprehension. He had observed obedience, not to fear, but to ultimate authority. And in that observation, he understood the truth that had been written into the fabric of existence itself. Some gates, he realized, were not meant to remain closed forever. Some thresholds exist not to deny, but to recognize. Some authority is so absolute, so originating, so undeniable, that even the oldest laws, the most eternal guards, and the harshest punishments must bend. And when that authority arrives, it does not demand. It does not coerce. It simply exists, and the world, in every shadow and flame, bows to the truth it represents. Abyrion remained, watching, guarding, witnessing, but he was no longer the same. The weight of eternity still pressed upon him, yet now it carried the clarity of purpose fulfilled. The underworld had shifted, not through battle or rebellion, but through the acknowledgement of something older, stronger, and unbreakable. The gates stood open, monumental and silent, a reminder that some authority transcends resistance, some law exists only to be fulfilled, and some presence cannot be denied. And as the shadows settled and the silence stretched across eternity, one truth lingered, echoing through the halls of fire and shadow, reverberating in the minds of the dead, the damned, and the eternal observers alike. Some gates are not opened by force, but by the one they were always meant to obey. Even in the deepest silence, that truth remained, eternal, unshakable, and haunting. And if stories hidden between myth, mystery, and the unseen speak to you, consider subscribing. There are still many gates left to open.